Hi guys, welcome back once again to my YouTube channel. I really hope you're doing fine, and in today's clip I just want you to watch this clip whereby fearless Mayor Mottley has came out and exposed Caribbean's puppet and most corrupt leaders, and she has also talked about the unity between Caribbean and Africa. Kindly watch this clip to the end and then we'll be back with more comments.
The voices of accountability. This beacon encourages every Bajan to speak up and take responsibility when they see something going wrong in this country, in their community, in their houses, in their jobs. It embodies the idea that accountability isn't just for leaders, but for every citizen. Tanya Stevens reminds us of corruption in high and low places only to remind us that because we have a colonial mentality, we see only the oppression that is above us and not the oppression that is among us. Creating a culture of silence in the face of patent wrongdoing is not just acceptable, it is dangerous and it is destructive. And speaking up respectfully and, more importantly, speaking truth becomes a civic duty of every citizen of this country and everyone who chooses to want to live among us, even though not a citizen. This applies, my friends, to whether we're talking about what happens in our home, our workplace, the church, the community, or even the block, especially the block. There is nothing to be gained through remaining silent when we know better. And to say it shoulda, it coulda, I didn't. Regret cannot be the platform to this country's stability, harmony, or prosperity.
Where Barbados, Jamaica, Grenada, and Dominica took action to ban South African goods in solidarity with the people of South Africa, recognizing that though they were thousands of miles away, there was an injustice being perpetrated, man's inhumanity to man, that required people who had little power to take a stand and to say, wrong is wrong. And their efforts were soon followed months later in April of 1960 in our sister island in Trinidad and Tobago, where the dock workers of Trinidad refused to take the cargo from South Africa off the ships in April of 1960 and refused to refuel the ship that had brought the cargo, recognizing that even though they were dock workers and not capable of great and grave decisions, they could do what they could within the space that they could. And their work was to be followed then, of course, by that titan of Caribbean revolution and social reform, Fidel Castro, El Comandante, who worked then with that other great Caribbean titan, Michael Manley of Jamaica, well known perhaps to many of you. And of course our own father of independence, Errol Walton Barrow, who worked with Fidel Castro in the struggle for the liberation of the peoples of Southern Africa by allowing the planes that left Havana, Cuba, to refuel in Bridgetown, Barbados, in order to bring the troops in to Southern Africa, and in particular Southwestern Africa. And then, of course, there was the decision of the Commonwealth heads of government. And I remember as a young law student in London, caught up in the fervor of the anti-apartheid movement and caught up in the passion of wanting to see your own imagery on television, because in those days you just didn't. And when we saw the students of South Africa week after week rise up to take their future into their own hands, it placed the pressure on leaders like Margaret Thatcher and others, such that by the time the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting went to Nassau, Bahamas, a determination was made to establish the Eminent Persons Group. And in that Eminent Persons Group, co-chaired by Malcolm Fraser of Australia and Chief Obasanjo of Nigeria, it also included a woman who was to become the first Governor General of Barbados, Dame Nita Barrow, who came here as one of the 7 persons to determine whether there could be a platform for talks and for release in order to ensure that the ungodly and unconscionable actions of apartheid could be brought to an end. Regrettably, their work was to be stymied by the then government, but they were capable and able at the time to meet Madiba. And it is instructive what they wrote in their unanimous report about Madiba in 1986, and I quote, "Having visited him on 3 occasions, what was their assessment? That he impressed us as an outstandingly able and sincere person whose quality of leadership were self-evident. We found him unmarked by any trace of bitterness, despite his long imprisonment. His overriding concern was for the welfare of all races in South Africa in a just society. He longed to be allowed to contribute to the process of reconciliation." This was not post-release. This was not on the eve of release. This was still deep in the bowels of his imprisonment. And you know, I've deliberately decided to take a segue this afternoon before addressing the fundamental issues, because it is important that we contextualize the struggle and the values for those who refuse to be reminded, or who fail to be reminded, or who are not reminded, may well believe that this was as easy as dealing with the twinkle of an eye with the remediation and reparation of an awful thing. It hurt me to hear that there are some who believe that Madiba did not do enough, and perhaps worse for a few, that he might have been a sellout, all because what they believe, justifiably so, should be theirs today is not yet theirs. I've deliberately started this conversation this evening by carrying you back to the 1950s and stopping in the 1980s and stopping again in the 1990s. Because if there is any one single truth, it is that each of us runs our leg of the relay. And the baton is all that can be required of us to carry. And yesterday I had the distinct honor of going to the Foundation's headquarters in the Center of Memory, and of reading, and I feel so privileged to be given copies of the transcript in Madiba's own handwriting, and I shall treasure them as long as I have breath. But in reading his own assessment of where he was and what he believed had happened, in what was to become the beginning of chapter 1 of the presidential years, it was ironic that he started with the words, "Men and women all over the world right down the centuries, come and go. Men and women all over the world, right down the centuries, come and go. What is more significant for me is that as he ended that first chapter, he also reflected on the fact that he sought at no stage for the fame that was to follow him, and that the notion that he could be regarded as a saint was one that he thoroughly rejected. And the last words, I never was one even on the basis of an earthly definition of a saint as a sinner who keeps trying. My friends, we need to pause sometimes and to remember context always. And I do so because in a very real sense, that which I've come to address you today on too is the subject of a great struggle, and will be the subject of a struggle that will require many different people to run their different legs of the baton, of the race, to hand over the baton. And the example of Madiba is the example more than any other that I would want us to hold on to, because in so doing, it is the values that he exhibited, the moral example, the moral compass that he provides, that gives us both the strength and the capacity to run this race, which will be the greatest race that humanity will require of any generation. It stands out for me that at the very outset, courage was never lacking. It is a cause for which I am prepared to fight, but a cause for which I am prepared to die. How many of us can say that today? It was the moral fortitude of a man that determined that no type of offer with special conditionalities for early freedom would be acceptable, because what was required was justice. It is amazing that in the face of the gravest and greatest inhumanity, not just to himself, to his family, to his people, that the vengeance that would otherwise eat and force others into action was absent from his mind, body, and spirit. And as I just read to you from the evidence of the Eminent Persons Group, not conveniently so as an act of politics, but as an act of character, deep in the bosom of his imprisonment. And then there's the story that was told to me yesterday by Cello, as we looked at the photographs of what his cell contained. And I well recall my own visit to Robben Island 20 years ago. And all who, like me, have practiced a little criminal law in my career know that that is a common sight in colonial constructed prisons that had no sanitary facilities. And the humility of the man captured best in being able to ensure that when one of his own brothers was unable to take care of themselves in the most basic and human of ways, that Madiba performed the duties of cleaning for it. An example of servant leadership, if ever there is one. So forgive me if I have strayed a bit, because I believe that in this world where everything is instantaneous and quick, and where people expect results like that, we sometimes need to remind ourselves of the context of the struggles that we fight, and to remind ourselves of what truly was at stake. There are some young people who would simply now, 3 decades after his release, will only know of Nelson Mandela in the context of a history book or in the stories told by others, but would not appreciate what it is to be prevented from being able to love who you want, to work where you want, to live where you want, to do what you want, in ways that are simply not capable of contemplation today. But we can't talk about economic justice and economic opportunity if the basic aspects of freedom have not been guaranteed. No one expects us to be stuck in a moment of time, but it is the understanding that he did what was his to do. It is now up to us to do what is ours to do. And it is for that reason I've come to KwaZulu-Natal. You know, we live in a world that is at a very strange moment in time. It's been described recently as a polycrisis. And it has been so described because as soon as you get accustomed to managing one crisis, you've been hit with another one and another one and another one. And that is what it has felt like in the last few years. This country already knows what it is to lose people to the ravages of a public health crisis as you did with HIV and AIDS for so long. Then to have to face, like the rest of us, the awful pandemic of COVID-19, taking away so many. All of us know people who have died in the last few years. None of us dreamt of a moment when our movement would be restricted such that we couldn't do the things that we wanted to do. And this was not being imposed on us by authoritarian governments. This was being imposed by public health specialists for the safety and survival of all of us. And as if that were not enough, because we were already fighting the climate crisis, we were still recovering from the financial crisis of 2008-9. As if all of that was not enough, then comes the awful scourge of the cancer of inflation, the cancer of the cost of living. And believe you me, it is a cancer, because you keep trying to run after it and run after it, but you can't catch up with it in that way. And we have now to come to understand that as much as we needed to mobilize to fight against vaccine inequity, that we were not a one-issue country or a one-issue people, that we literally had to fight these multiple crises, because as all of this is happening, people were still dying from the climate crisis. I don't talk about climate change. Change happened a long time ago. Crisis is where we are, and crisis is what we have to fight. And today, I want us to recognize that what is required of us is going to have to allow us to, one, develop partnerships in places where we may never have dreamt of so doing before, and to be able to do things in new ways that we had never thought of doing, and that the actions required are not simply those of others, but of us. Because it is the collective action that has led the world to be where it is today. There is no doubt that those primarily responsible for the increase in greenhouse gas emissions are the G20 countries, for whom 80% of the responsibility is there. Within that context, the traditional colonial powers who benefited from the Industrial Revolution through our blood, our sweat, and our tears, have been the ones who have effectively put the world in this position of warming. Theirs is the stock of gases. But then there are those who continue today, for which there are many of us. No name, no blame, because it's all of us. And it is the combined effect of the stop primarily, but yes, the flow today, that continues to cause the problems. I want us to reflect on the principles of justice and solidarity.
All the time, who sees us and who hears us? We continue to be confronted by problems of blacklisting, which pale into insignificance when compared to climate change, but which destroy our financial sector. The illicit flow of weapons, such that the ease with which people can go into public spaces and shoot and kill others is now regarded as just another item on the news, because we promote profit in the manufacture and trade of guns and weapons, of non-communicable diseases that strike down our people in the most insidious of ways, because we allow diets that promote the prosperity of a few multinational corporations to become the norm of the day with the food that we eat and the lives that we live. And in the case within our own community, Belize and Guyana continue to face challenges to their territorial integrity. I suppose people feel that because we have talked so long about Belize and Guyana and Cuba, that we can continue to talk about climate change and these other things, and that it is okay for it to be another tick on a UN General Assembly speech. These are all threats to our stability, to the people's stability in our lands. But you know, since last we met, there are other instances and circumstances, not of our making, that may yet destabilize us. And we say it over and over, but we ask who is listening. And you know, we don't come with tales of woe only. The Caribbean has produced excellence. It really has. Nobel laureates, sportsmen who have excelled and are the best in the world of their type, artists, the best in the world of their type, leaders who have inspired previous generations and current generations. We don't come here as a proud people asking for handouts. We don't want and will not be mendicant. What we want, no, what we need is fiscal and policy space. Fiscal and policy space to achieve sustainable development, to be nimble, to adapt, and to innovate in ways that allow us to be true and faithful to the task of bringing prosperity to our people, or as in the theme of this General Assembly, to eradicate poverty, to educate our people, to include all such that there's not some outside and some inside. We want an international order equally that recognizes that there must be different policy prescriptions to suit the circumstances that we all have. And we can still be friends, small and large, north and south, Christian, Hindu, Muslim. all different races, all genders. An equitable and just international order that is truly built on the principles of justice and fairness for all and not just for some. A United Nations that recognizes that as 74 years old, we must be able to have difficult conversations as mature people and solve them. Many in the developing world were persuaded or required to abandon policies that were designed for the majority of our population to be transformed. And those policies were fashioned to adopt a consensus that was settled in Washington, D.C. and named thereafter. And that ultimately, regrettably, was about the consolidation of wealth in the hands of a very few. And that's why we have seen the growing inequality that we have seen in the world over the last few decades. That is why too many people over the world have become cynical about governments and about the benefits that they can bring to them. The fueling of the greed of a few threatens to undermine what little gains we have made since independence. And we judge ourselves harshly because independence is a recent phenomenon for us. Others who have taken 150 years to get where they have gotten are still stumbling and falling. And you want to judge those who have had less than 50 or 60 years to operate in a world that has not been made in their image and that does not reflect their interests. This is the fate, my friends, of simply too many. And Mr. President, despite our small sizes, the 14 countries of the Caribbean community have been able to play leadership roles of international import. I can't stand here today without talking about St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that has become the smallest nation of the world ever to be elected to the Security Council to sit on it. We are proud of them. In addition, and I want to speak to this, because when CARICOM was confronted with the unfolding situation in Venezuela, I accompanied the then chairman of CARICOM, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, to meet in this building with the UN Secretary General in January of this year. And we met with many delegations, and some said we were wasting our time, and some said the time for talk was already over. And we said then, as we say almost 9 months later, the time for dialogue, the time for talk, my friends, can never be over in a world that wants peace and prosperity. We don't take sides, but what we know is that you cannot propel war over dialogue. The people of Venezuela must be allowed to decide their own future in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter. Principles of non-intervention, non-interference, prohibition of the threat or use of force, respect for the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. It is regrettable that other multilateral organizations have not followed their own charters. And that is what makes the actions of our Secretary General of the UN more laudable, for refusing to breach his own charter and take actions even though member states have hurled into the recognition of those unelected. Our Caribbean Sea must remain a zone of peace, and for that we shall fight. Mr. President, I speak plainly and without fear, because from independence, Barbados' foreign policy has been premised on the simple principle of friends of all, satellites of none. Barbados, therefore, has always remained and will remain.
Hi guys, welcome back once again. I really hope we have watched the full clip, and one thing I can really say is that I really love how PM Mottley of Barbados usually come out strong, fearless, without maybe being afraid of anyone. She truly talks with courage, and she usually exposes what's really happening in the Caribbean. She has really came out and talk about the unity between the Caribbean country. She has truly come out and talk about the puppet, greedy, and most corrupt leaders in the Caribbean. And one thing we should know is that we have the right to choose these leaders, but sometimes these leaders come out and convince the local people. They promise them heaven, but when when they are being given the chance to maybe to run for a country or maybe to guide the country, they usually show us the truth face. And a lot of local people are the ones who usually go through a lot. And imagine if Mia Mottley, she was a man, how could strong could he be? Imagine if Mia Mottley was a man. She's just a woman, and a lot of people really love her courage, the way she truly spoke with confidence, and a lot of Caribbean, I really believe, a lot of Caribbean people really believe or really admire if she could be their leader. And Mia Mottley, a lot of people really love him, more so from the Caribbean and also from Africa, because she has been talking about the African and Caribbean unity, because we all know we are all blacks, and we don't like greedy and puppet leaders, more so the corrupt leaders. We have all seen how corruption is everywhere. Corruption is not a new thing in any country. Corruption is in Caribbean, corruption is in Africa, corruption is everywhere in the world. But one thing I would like our leaders to follow, or one thing I could like our leaders to be like, is like to be like Mia Mottley, or to be like the president of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traore. We have all seen how Ibrahim Traore, he has truly changed Burkina Faso, how he came to power, and he just managed to clear the national debt of Burkina Faso in a span of 2 years. He removed all the puppet leaders and all the greedy leaders in his system. He removed all the colonialists in Burkina Faso, and we have all seen how Burkina Faso is really developing at a very high pace. Burkina Faso, they are employing their own people. When it's come to road construction, when it's come to factory, when it's come to hospital building, the people who are building all those things, they are the people from Burkinabe. They are not people from outside the country. This is a form of maybe creating job opportunities in a country. And I would just like a lot of African leaders and Caribbean leaders to copy what President Ibrahim Traore is doing to his people of Burkina Faso, because we've all seen how he has been able to convince his people to love him and also to support him. Then Burkina Faso people really came out and said that they don't need another leader, don't need another president. They are much okay with President Ibrahim Traore. Not like other African leaders whereby all people are coming out, crying out of anger, crying out of how they are not employed, not only in Africa, also in Caribbean. And these are the same greedy leaders, puppet leaders, who they just have money, they just taking this money and investing it elsewhere. Imagine you can find our leaders that have invested outside the country in foreign countries, whereas the people in that country are getting sick, they don't have food, and these people, they don't want to create or make our country look better. When it's come to hospitals, some African countries and Caribbean countries, they have poor hospitals, poor school, but these leaders, they just know what they are doing, because whenever they get sick or their member of the family gets sick, they usually go and treat them outside the country. Whenever they want to educate the children, you can hear such, maybe one of a child or one son of a certain president or PM is studying abroad, is studying in maybe in US and Canada, whereas while our school in our own country are going through a lot. They don't want to pay our teachers, they don't want to pay our doctors, making them to strike all over and making us to look like we can't do these things. And one thing I can just tell you, that African is the most richest continent on earth. We have everything we need. Even in Caribbean is the most also richest continent. They have everything. When it's come to oil, go to Guyana. When it's come to everything, just it is in Caribbean. And Jamaica, they have also been having this problem of maybe corruption, and they have been talking about it for a very long period of time. They have been exposing what the government is doing to them, and they just want change. And this change is what we need, because the people are the ones who are putting you in an office. The people are the ones who come out and decide that you are the best. So why can't you just do the best for them? If they have decided to choose you, why can't you do the right thing to them for them to be satisfied? When it's come to employment, create a lot of job opportunities so that these people cannot go on the street, most especially the youth, go to the street, start stealing from people. And when someone is being caught stealing, it's caused a lot of violence in the society. When it's come to maybe making better schools, why can't you do a lot of projects, make factories, so that at least people can be able to go and work in there, at least to be able to feed their families? You have all seen how Burkina Faso, they're creating factories, they're creating everything so that at least the people can't suffer anymore. And we've all seen how Burkina Faso is really developing at a high pace, just because they managed to choose the right leader, the leader who is not a puppet leader, who is not a corrupt leader, who is not a greedy leader. So let's do what President Ibrahim Traore is doing. Our leaders, let's do what President Ibrahim Traore is doing, and let me just know what you think in the comment section. And if it was the first time you come across my video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and share. Thanks so much for your time. May God bless you. You are one love.